The bells were ringing, calling the court into session. The judge, a tall Zexar, had already taken her seat at the front of the hall. The insectoid had positioned herself atop the raised platform, with considerable effort on her part. She was a breeding female, born with the right to govern the Zexar people and their colonies. Hers was the right to decree the fate of the human placed on trial. She clacks her mandibles, and the court grows silent before her. Will the accused kindly stand up? She observes the dark-skinned human stand up. He's an imposing figure, almost 2 meters tall. Muscles flex beneath his thin skin, and charcoal hair covers his head and chin, with finer hairs on his arms. The being reveals its teeth, and for a moment Vela is taken aback by the creature's boldness. Then her translator indicates that the gesture is not intended as a threat, but rather the opposite. Smile, an action displaying happiness, joy, affection. The oddness of this being's physical gestures did not suggest a strong capacity to defend its own innocence. She takes a deep breath before proceeding. Rowan Blackthorne, you have been brought before this court on charges of piracy, murder, looting, rape, resisting arrest, and jaywalking. How do you plead? The human starts to emit loud, guttural grunts and howls, the intensity of which caused most of the court attendees to flinch. Laughter, a way of expressing merriment and happiness. Then the creature spoke. Mostly guilty, I'll admit, but I can assure you of one thing, darling. I never engage in intimate relations with anyone without their explicit agreement beforehand. Vela was astonished. For the first time since the initial court session, an accused had actually entered a guilty plea. Did he have no concern for his own life? She was undeniably perplexed by his sweet cheeks comment. She lacked cheeks, and even if she possessed them, they would likely be sour, given that she originated from an acidic world. You plead guilty? Please explain yourself. The human smiled once more. This time she understood what the gesture meant without needing the translator's prompt. Of course, dear judge. It all began when I was born in the slums on the outskirts of Miami, Florida, back on Earth. Vela interrupted him with a sharp click. The court isn't interested in hearing your entire life story, human. Please try to avoid bringing up irrelevant subjects. The human seemed amused. But it's not unnecessary. You must understand why I became who I am to make a fair judgment, right? A case constructed on actions and words removed from context will invariably conclude in favor of the court, not of true justice. Vela now understood what sort of case this would be, and readied herself for a very lengthy session in court. Very well, proceed. Now, where was I? Oh yes, it all started shortly after I was born. My dad was a former Marine, a veteran of the major conflict with Russia. He was an alcoholic, and a nasty one at that. You might not think that a man confined to a wheelchair for the remainder of his life would pose much of a danger, but when you're just a kid, even someone with a disability can be intimidating. Indeed, besides intoxicating himself with alcohol, he had previously lost both his legs to a landmine. It had rendered him a wheeling wreck of a man, but I'm getting off track. My mother passed away when I was around 4 years of age. Her death occurred during a drive-by shooting connected to drugs. Some group of troublemakers firing at another group of troublemakers, with innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire. My dad's veteran pension didn't sustain us for long, as he swiftly spent each month's payment on alcohol and pills to cope with his pain. However, the Social Security system has been overwhelmed and underfunded for years now, and nobody was concerned about yet another struggling young person. I took my first car without permission when I was 13. It happened to be the first time I had eaten in a week. I was desperate and hungry, and I was good at it. You wouldn't believe how skilled I was. And now I had come to understand that if society would allow me to go hungry, I could pilfer the bread for my sustenance. Naturally, my fortune took a turn, and I ended up in a youth detention facility after the police raided the chop shop I had established. Tough luck, huh? Drake chuckled softly to himself, just to watch the Zexar tremble slightly more. Well, that was about to change. I'd been locked up for a year when the Nearall chose to pay a visit and release their bombs. I suppose I was fortunate. The jail where I was held had been considered too insignificant to target with bombs. And it was right after the Nearall had been pushed back, and everybody had assembled in a large circle, singing Kumbaya and chanting about solidarity against a shared enemy, that somebody came up with the clever notion to take a group of prisoners, place them on vessels, and direct them towards the foe's supply lines. I volunteered naturally. I was becoming somewhat tired of prison, and I had always harbored a desire to venture into space. And after the war ended, I wasn't simply going to return to civilian life. I'd been surviving on the streets for as far back as I could recall, and I possessed no job-related abilities or any kind of connections in any area of employment. What I possessed, however, was the Crimson Falcon and a spirit yearning for adventure. And so I charted a path to the Rim, where I've been plundering, engaging in piracy, and evading capture ever since. As the definitions of alcoholism, drugs, gangs, and drive-by shootings were introduced, Vela had been overcome with fear. That a species would inflict this sort of thing upon themselves during peacetime was unprecedented. It was abhorrent. The fact that the human had presented these things as facts, with as much detachment as a handmaiden would describe the correct arrangement of seats at a banquet, didn't lessen the reality. If anything, it made it worse. She realizes that her mandibles have become entirely dry and allows her tongue to glide gently over them. Very well. Does the accusing have anything further to add? The accusing party twitches its antennae in a negative motion. No, matron. I think the defendant and the evidence already presented has been sufficient to demonstrate his guilt, as well as his complete disregard for the law. She nods slightly. Very well. I hereby sentence the defendant, Mr. Rowan Blackthorne, to re-education in order to serve the Zexar cause. Remove him from the court. The courtroom erupts with jeers as she extends clemency to the almost mythical buccaneer called Rowan Blackthorne. Francis, on the other hand, does nothing but smile, exactly as planned. Vela rises in the silky sheets, still unclothed for slumber, gazing into the messenger's eyes. Say that again. The female worker looks nervous. The warden of the Star System prison is on the communicator, my lady. He's saying that Rowan Blackthorne has broken out. It was an absurd idea. The detention facility where they had dispatched Francis until the Zexar colony had built the infrastructure necessary to accommodate the human for his re-education was regarded as the most secure prison in the sector. It was staffed by all sorts of guards from a variety of different species. The space station was regarded as one of double max security standards. In addition to the high-caliber staff operating the station, it was also situated in space. It was impossible for anybody to enter or exit the station without following the correct protocols, but somehow Rowan Blackthorne had. Vela engaged in a brief discussion with the warden overseeing the station, after which she had taken command of a cruiser staffed with the most exceptional honor guard soldiers and the most adept inquisitors. Rowan Blackthorne had been under her charge. She needed to return him to prison. They reached the Zugaki system and moored at the prison station 1.5 cycle following the message's arrival. When the airlock opens in front of them, Vela moves outside the ship's interior. Before her waits the somewhat nervous-looking warden. Lead us to the camera room. I need to see everything that happened before the escape. The warden nods. Very well. This way, please. He seemed relieved not to have to explain himself. This is the first unusual event that inmate Drake took part in. This is the lunch queue from 3 days back. Watch the Kragnar as it nears the Kirakka in the line. The warden presses play, and the scene resumes. A pair of sizable Kragnar, seemingly male, advances toward the noticeably smaller Kirak. Oi, Bug, you're new here, so we're gon' make it simple for you. We ain't fond of your type round these parts, so if you want that nasty body of yours to stay in one piece, you best start coughing up some tribute to us. The insectoid begins retreating from the approaching adversaries, quickly halted by the wall behind it. Not a single alien so much as blinks as the Kirak begins to frantically flee. Hey, furballs, why don't you pick on someone more your own size? Like, say me? Drake had come up to the pair from the side, just beyond the camera's view, and right as one of the Kragnar turns to look at him, his face collides with a hurled bipedal seating construct. He is knocked down, and judging by the teeth flying out of his mouth, the impact was quite severe. The second Kragnar whirls around to confront the new adversary just in time to be met with a powerful kick to the chest. The Quintar crumples, and the confrontation ends before the Quintar even had a chance to attempt an attack. The guards haven't even shifted from their positions, yet the logs indicate that they've already alerted Medbay to anticipate 2 new arrivals. Why haven't the guards reacted? Vela is quite perplexed by the absence of a response from the guards. We don't step in during inmate-on-inmate conflicts unless there's a risk of fatality. Our medical unit is well equipped to handle some minor scuffles, and this is the first instance of someone challenging the Kragnar group we have here. Typically, the Kragnar just intimidate the new inmates. Never anything too severe. That is, until you sent that human here. Let me show you the second incident he was involved in. The warden switches the scene on the holoscreen before them. On this occasion, it's the human in a physical training area, oddly populated with Kragnar. This is later the same day. Just watch. Hey, human, we ain't happy about what you did to our buddies back in the Eaton area, and we're going to see to it that you get what you deserve. Drake grins and casts a look in the direction of the camera, and the guards stationed outside. I get the feeling the guards aren't going to interfere. The alpha of the Kragnar pack smiles fiercely. Unlike the human expression, this was intended as an intimidating display. Not unless we kill you. No one's going to save you now, ape scum. The man takes hold of the weightlifting equipment he had been utilizing for his workout and detaches the weights from each end. All right, punks, bring it on. Vela can hardly bear to watch it. The human is so terribly outnumbered, and even though he has an aluminum rod, it won't do much to balance the odds. The human doesn't hesitate for the Kragnar to strike, but rushes at the pack's leader. The Kragnar appears prepared this time, and multiple males assault the human from every direction. Yet the human does not succumb to the makeshift blades of the Kragnar. No, he stands among them, reminiscent of the old war deities of Vela's folk. She watches the sweat trickle from his body as he makes the metal rod whirl like a typhoon of devastation. The human shatters every Kragnar approaching him. But he doesn't escape unscathed. As the conflict subsides, the Kragnar lie defeated, moaning and weeping in agony on the ground, while the human bleeds red fluid from wounds in his flesh inflicted by the blades fortunate enough to land their mark. Vela can't help but admire the creature that she set out to recapture. He fended off an entire pack of the most ferocious barbarians known in space. Humans truly are fearsome creatures. What happened next? The warden looks a bit sheepish for a moment. Well, they took him to the med bay for medical attention. He was covered in multiple stab wounds across his torso. My records indicate that he was in the med bay for about 30 minutes getting treated. Wait a second. This can't be right. According to my log, he was subsequently summoned back to the med bay by the TWEC nurse for anatomical examinations. According to the logs, he was brought back to his cell after 2 hours. How intriguing. Vela was starting to get a feeling of where this was going. Did he make any further visits to the med bay after that? The warden sifts through the logs. Indeed, according to the records, he apparently made another visit on the day of the escape that lasted 6 hours? What on earth could possibly take that long? Vela sighs. Of course. Well then, bring up the footage of the escape. The human dashed through the station's hallways, clutching a pulse rifle in one hand, with a section of metal plating fastened to the other. Vela observed him moving towards the guard checkpoints, the metal board shielding him from incoming projectiles, while he utilized the pulsar to take down the guards with precision she would characterize as extraordinary. She observes him nearing the exterior walls of the station, where he places a satchel close to a window. There is a moment of stillness, and the warden pauses the recording. I hope you're ready, milady. Things are about to get freaky. The footage continues, and Vela observes the human exhaling, followed by the satchel detonating, causing the entire passageway to rapidly lose pressure. She observes the human being thrown out into space with no form of protection. She can't believe her eyes. I thought you said he escaped, not committed suicide. The warden grins a little maniacally. We would never have called you if that was the case. We never located his remains, and we looked for a full cycle before contacting you. He's gone. Nearly a week had passed before Vela caught any sight or sound of her target. For 7 days, it seemed as though Rowan Blackthorn had vanished from the universe entirely, and she had become doubtful that they would ever receive word or catch a glimpse of Drake again. Then it arrived, Reports from a Galatian outpost in the Rim had stated that the Crimson Falcon, Rowan Blackthorn's vessel, had carried out a raid on one of their orbital processing facilities. The assault report stated that the Buccaneer had absconded with substantial quantities of merchandise, as well as disabling the regional merchant fleet and sending half of the facility soaring into the air. Now they had regained the humans' tracks. The hunt continues. They set the course for the Galactian outpost. The report didn't lie. The sight was awe-inspiring. The massive spherical station circling the planet had a huge crater in its side, essentially gutting it. The opening was large and dark, and demonstrated some of the humans' tendency for total and absolute destruction. "Hail the station. I need to know precisely what occurred here and where the humans went following the conflict." The helmsman nods his head and begins hailing the station. "Setting the comm to the primary screen, mistress." Vela allowed her mandibles to relax slightly as an indication of her satisfaction with the male's behavior. The snail-like being displayed on the screen was unattractive by Zexaran norms. It appeared weak, gelatinous, and slimy. These were all characteristics considered unsettling and nauseating to the Zexar. But Vela made every effort not to let her revulsion show. "Why have you come here, Zexar? We have nothing that belongs to you." The gelatinous being communicated using squeaks and piping sounds that primarily reminded Vela of a mammal expelling gas. "We've come because we're pursuing the individual who owns the vessel that assaulted you. We'd like to ask for your assistance in this matter to expedite the apprehension of the offender known as Rowan Blackthorn." The Galatian narrows its eyes, looking at them for a moment. "Why are you looking for a criminal with the entire cruiser, Zexar?" Vela began to side with the Sol Alliance. The Galatians were indeed among the most irritating sentient beings in the galaxy, and she responds after a barely noticeable sigh. "We're pursuing him because he broke out of a maximum security facility while in our custody. Now, are you going to help us or not?" The Galatian switches off the comms. Vela looks to her head inquisitor. "Don't fret, my lady. The Galatian is likely just waiting for his instructions." It had taken nearly 10 minutes before they were given permission to dock at the station, but at last they had made it on board. The humans absconded with the full yield of this season, pushing this outpost back financially by nearly a year. Following that, they set up the main power station to explode, the effects of which are visible from the exterior. In total, we calculate that the humans stole about 2,000 units. The Galatian stops himself. Well, in any case. Following that, they executed a subspace jump, vanishing in the direction of XY213 without a doubt. Vela stops the Galatian by raising her left manipulator. 2,000 units of what? The Galatian seems uncertain for a moment. Ood, placed in cryostasis for delivery to civilization. Ood? Is this a slaving operation? The Galatian shakes its head. No, the Ood aren't self-sufficient. If we hadn't discovered them, they would have perished. They're genetically engineered to serve. That's what they're created for. Without instructions, they'll simply stand around until they wither and die. Our processing of them is actually for their own benefit, really. Vela remained unconvinced by the Galatian's statements, yet she felt it wasn't her position to comment on the customs of this society. All right then, you brought up the system XY213. What's located there, and for what reason might the humans travel to it? The Galatian raises its head in smug satisfaction. It's the main center for the humans in the sector. If there's any place the human Rowan Blackthorn would go to sell his illegally acquired goods, it would be there. We'll transmit the coordinates to your vessel. The Alliance station was very different from what Vela had expected. It was a tall spire constructed of metal, with a wheel-shaped structure encircling it. The whole station is spinning on its axis, likely in an effort to generate artificial gravity without a significant energy cost. The station is encircled by a diverse array of vessels, spanning from the local defense fleet's cruiser, accompanied by its frigate support ships, to far-reaching supercarriers and more compact trading vessels. When the Zexarian cruiser emerges from subspace, it's clear the Alliance anticipated their arrival. The defense cruiser in the area is fully activated, its fearsome primary weapon pointed directly at them. "They're signaling us, milady, and judging by the appearance of that vessel, They're unlikely to be pleased if we ignore it. Vela takes a deep breath. Main screen, helmsman. The man complies, and the display is occupied by the face of a human with silvering hair. He is attired in a white uniform and bears several insignia upon his chest. Vela doesn't have the slightest clue what the vibrant bricks signify, but she can only surmise that the being is the commanding officer of the humans. What's the reason for entering Alliance territory with a military vessel, Zexarian? Our treaty of non-aggression with your species remains intact. Explain yourselves. It took some time for Vela to clarify to this Commander Iman Al-Farka the purpose of their visit, but they had eventually managed to reach an agreement. As a condition for entry to the station, her vessel was required to deactivate all shields and disable power to every weapon system on the cruiser. Realizing that this station was their strongest lead to the pirates' current whereabouts, they found themselves with few options but to comply. They reached the station dock by shuttle, and Vela must now tolerate being sprayed with a kind of fine, clear liquid before the metal doors leading further into the station open. The route in front of them is obstructed by a human standing there. Based on what Vela believes to be enlarged mammary glands, it's a female who has recently delivered offspring. Hello, ma'am. I'm Mira Thornwood, and I've been tasked with assisting you throughout your visit. A handler. Not surprising, considering the humans aren't members of the Galactic Senate, and up to now haven't exactly been on the friendliest terms. After all, the humans nearly eradicated the Near-Al, one of the 3 founding species of the Galactic Council, and the one that possessed the largest fleet. The humans utterly decimated the Navy and destroyed their industrial capacity. Additionally, they seized a large portion of Near-Al territory and displaced vast numbers of Near-Al inhabitants, many of whom now depended on outside food sources, as their agricultural worlds had been devastated by the human forces. Though the human before her didn't do much to instill fear in Vela, the Zexar was inherently quite sizable, and this human appeared petite for her own species, so Vela towered just slightly above her. So Lady Vela, was it? Where would you like to go first? The pirate, Rowan Blackthorn. I'm searching for him. Could you show me the docking records? Vela asked the human female, figuring there was no point in delaying. Oh, indeed. The records are stored in the database, and you're able to request access at the harbor office in Department 43, located right here in Dock B. Vela just looks at the female in confusion. The woman doesn't seem to skip a beat. Follow me, I'll take you there. She spins on her heel and strides away before Vela has a chance to process the rapid-fire instructions of their handler, who is now moving off at a brisk pace. Pardon me, Mira Thornwood, but can you please slow down? The human instantly slows her pace. My apologies, of course. And please, just call me Grace, or Miss Flanagan, if you prefer to be formal. Here, the office is just ahead. The harbor office felt cooler than the exterior station, which Vela found rather pleasant. She extends herself slightly as her eyes adapt to the considerably brighter illumination of the office area. The walls of the room are covered with hollow screens lining the surface, filled with the intricate scribbles that are the human written language, along with pictures scattered across the displays. Behind the desk of the office sits a blue-skinned Trellic, casually tapping away at a small portable screen. Vela hears faint pings and the tinkling of bells coming from the device. As it turned out, a good deal of the propaganda was accurate. The humans indeed compelled their subordinates to perform the most tedious and monotonous duties. Despicable. The female human approaches the desk. Colonel, where's Ensign Frank? The Trellic takes his feet off the table and ceases whatever he was doing with the device. He needed to visit the medical facilities. He experienced an abrupt bout of explosive diarrhea. His pants literally exploded. The woman's face twists in an odd manner, yet it reminds her primarily of the smile-like expression she's observed humans wearing before. She emits a strange, muffled sort of laugh. Her translator tells her that this sound is referred to as a giggle, though additional clarification is not forthcoming. Vela is perplexed, wondering why this human is treating the Trellic as a superior being. Pardon me, where do I request docking information? The Trellic switches his gaze to the Zexar princess. That would be right here. Usually you'd be handing it over to the ensign who's meant to be sitting here. which would then be analyzed by the AI to filter out absurd or inappropriate requests. And then if the request happens to be from a non-alliance species, it comes to me, where I go through the request and make sure it doesn't have any military significance. However, given that I'm already seated here, you may as well hand it over to me directly. Vela is still confused. Pardon me, but what is your position here? After all, every source states that the Trellics are servants of the humans. This whole situation is peculiar, to put it mildly. Both the Trellic and the human look at her, seemingly amused. I'm Navy Colonel Jorak, and I oversee docking and customs. You notice these stripes on my shoulder? They indicate my rank within the Alliance Navy. He clears his throat, then taps on a holoscreen that has appeared over the desk before him. Now, what sort of information was it you wanted? Say what you will about the Alliance. They were truthful, and their documentation was flawless. The logs were strange, however. They indicated that the Crimson Falcon had docked a week earlier, but they also mentioned that it had unloaded 2,000 Ood refugees in cryostasis. The handler was now escorting them to the medical facilities to examine the refugees. After all, if Alliance records indicate that they are autonomous enough to seek asylum, it would result in them falling under the jurisdiction of the Post-Humanity Sentience Protocol, rendering them ineligible for the slave position within Galatian society. Yet why would the Galatians deceive? Somehow, this entire situation must be some kind of human ploy to take Galatian possessions. However, she would wait for the inspection to finish before forming her opinion. They walk towards the glass wall that leads into the expansive medical facility. Vela is somewhat astonished by the size of the medical area. These humans must have an enormous population for them to be ready to care for so many individuals simultaneously. How come the Ood are situated in such a sophisticated medical center? Wouldn't your aristocrats protest about non-member species receiving treatment in the same facilities as themselves? The human female giggles again. Well, maybe they would if they existed. In the course of the major Russian conflict on Sol 3, or as it's known to us, Earth, the last remnants of human royalty were eliminated in an effort to shatter the spirit of various countries, particularly Great Britain. But let's move past the history lesson. All members of the Sol Alliance, as well as refugees given sanctuary by the Sol Alliance, are entitled to comprehensive medical care should the need arise. The doctor in charge of the Ood rehabilitation program is expected to join us any moment now. The elderly human who emerged from the medical facility appeared ghostly in comparison to all the humans she had encountered thus far. His complexion was as pale as the finest Zexarian silk, and his golden hair streaked with gray, along with his sapphire eyes, gave Vela the impression that he had been sculpted from marble, sapphires, gold, and silver. Were it not for the lines on his face, she believed the human would appear quite statuesque, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. I understand you're here to look into whether the Ood are sentient beings or not. I can assure you with certainty that they are, at least once the brain implants put in by the Galatians have been taken out, and they've been gradually freed from the chemicals introduced into their system to keep them under control. We're presently handling them as quickly as our facilities permit, and they're subsequently to be transported to Sol, where the refugee station that will accommodate them until their system has, well, never mind. You're welcome to talk to one of them if you wish. Everything the humans had said had been true. Vela found it hard to believe, but it was true. The Ood she had spoken with was perhaps the kindest and gentlest being she had ever encountered, and its descriptions of what transpired left her with a heavy feeling in her stomach. The Ood were a civilization in the beginning stages of their renaissance when the Galatians descended from the heavens, presenting themselves as deities and compelling the Ood to yield under the menace of total destruction. And then they had seized their most powerful and capable to be utilized as slaves. Vela was furious. The Galatians were violating the law and deceiving her directly. Moreover, they were committing an utterly abhorrent offense as well. After this search for Rowan, Blackthorn is finished. She will not stop until the Senate has been notified. She was now exiting the medical facilities, escorted by her handler. Tell me, Grace, how might I obtain details about the pirates' upcoming location? Flanagan smiles kindly. If anybody's got a clue, It'd be the folks at Krovax's Tavern down in Section H. Let me show you the way. The atmosphere in the vast chamber was nauseating, permeated with noxious fumes, the odor of some unidentifiable toxin Vela can't quite place, and the pungent pheromones of the humans assembled in the hall. The fact that humans would voluntarily enter such a room was terrifying to Vela, yet there was more to it than that. Vela's delicate sound-detecting membranes were assaulted by powerful drumbeats, the shrieking of some unearthly creature, and bellowed lyrics of what she guessed to be a human. Suddenly, she experiences a sensation as if something soft glides across her head, enveloping the membrane openings on either side. The discomfort from the loud surroundings instantly becomes more bearable. She glances back to find that her handler had just placed some kind of yellow pads linked by a slim metal frame over Vela's membranes. Did you carry those around all this time? Vela had never observed the human carrying the odd device before, but it's possible she had stored it in that peculiar black bag of hers. To Vela's astonishment, the human gives a nod. Ear protection is a typical component of the standard package when interacting with Zexar on a space station. After all, numerous areas are noisy, and Zexar hearing is well known for its sensitivity. With the pain from the intense sound now subsiding, Vela realizes that the percussion, screeching, and vocals blend into a kind of unified harmony, unlike any she's experienced before. The harsh, aggressive tones course through her body, and she feels as if they're awakening some ancient anger deep within her heart. She had listened to the star singers of Asalim, but even they couldn't match the raw emotion of these humans. "My lady, is anything wrong?" Vela emerges from her deep contemplation, shifting her gaze toward the human. She clears her throat. "No, everything's all right. The surroundings just require a bit of adjustment too." She takes a deep breath, which she instantly regrets. The harsh, noxious smoke burns in her throat, nearly preventing her from breathing and triggering a bout of coughs. Abruptly, she realizes the bar has gone very quiet, apart from the strange music. All chatter has ceased, and she can sense numerous human gazes boring into her exoskeleton. All the patrons in the pub had paused their activities and were staring towards her. Even those who had just been occupied with striking several balls using an elongated plant fiber cue. Vela senses a chilly shiver travel up her spine. She's familiar with tales about how humans treat their foes, and the individuals here appear less than pleased by her presence. Vela notices multiple anti-Senate posters affixed to the walls of the establishment. "Down with oppression," "Death to the enslavers," and other comparable phrases adorn the walls. While Vela observes, numerous humans go back to their previous activities, yet everyone appears to give her more notice than she feels entirely at ease with, considering the situation. However, there's no point in waiting any longer. Vela approaches what she believes to be the shop's proprietor, a hulking human with arms as thick as Vela's torso and graying black hair covering his face and head. His keen, sunken, predatory eyes appear to look right through her. "What do you want, Anti?" The man's voice cut through the ambient noise and penetrated the protective headgear provided to her by the handler. "I'm seeking some details about a lawbreaker who recently came through this station." The man grunts. "You people have livers?" Vela blinks. "No, but I don't see what that has to do with anything." The man puts down the mug he was polishing with a rag. "This ain't no charity operation. Menu for Zeno without livers is over there on the left. No beverages, no conversation." Vela is taken aback by the human's bold speech, but there's no sense in making these humans more antagonistic by disputing with the shop owner. She glances at the menu he indicated. She isn't familiar with any of the beverages listed. "I'll take one." "Orange juice?" The man grins. "That'll be 5 credits." "But the menu clearly says it's 2. The man laughs. "Talkin' tax." Vela lets out a sigh and hands over the money to the man. At least they were willing to take Galactic credits. He sets down a glass of yellow liquid before her. Odd that they referred to it as orange juice when it's plainly yellow. Perhaps humans have some sort of visual impairment. Fortunately, the human had inserted a straw into the glass. Vela takes a drink, and she has to fight the urge not to spit it out. The beverage contained an acid. Were the humans attempting to poison her? And the intensity of the flavor was incredible. It overwhelmed all of her olfactory senses for a full minute, and the taste continued to sting in her mouth. Vela wheezes while the human chuckles at her expense. Well, at least it appears to have lifted the spirits of the brutish human. So, what did you want to talk about, Auntie? Vela glances up at him, and she notices his keen eyes sparkle with amusement. I'm searching for the outlaw Rowan Blackthorn. I've been informed that information about him might be available here. The man snickers slightly. Francis? Yeah, he passed through here a few days back. Him and a couple of other crews were talking about organizing a joint raid or the like. A raid? This could be bad news. Very bad news. And? A raid against whom? Where? Please, I need every bit of information you can provide me. The man yawns. Well, you know, my memory's not quite what it once was. Perhaps you might offer me something to help refresh my recollection. Vela is perplexed. What might she possess that could assist this human in recalling? This seemed utterly nonsensical in every way. A moment of quiet passes as the human simply gazes at her with anticipation. He exhales, murmuring something too quiet for her translator to catch. I'm talking about cash, damn it. What's it worth to you? Following a solid quarter-hour of bargaining with the individual over the cost of the intel, Vela had obtained the information she sought. And the cost of 150 credits was certainly worth the most unsettling information she had received. The pirates had been focusing on the planet Goran, 3, a Zexarian settlement world. Vela was now rushing back to the ship as quickly as she could, beseeching every deity that they would not be too late to rescue the planet from the pirates' fury. The devastation Vela observed was much worse than she had anticipated in several respects. The colony's defensive systems were utterly destroyed, yet that wasn't the full extent of it. There were various other vessels drifting about as burning ruins. However, none were of human origin. All belonged to the Kragnar. Although the settlement, at least from this vantage point, appears largely undamaged, this is puzzling. If human pirates had attacked this location, how come the colony remained unscathed? And what explained the presence of numerous damaged Kragnar ships in this area? Had the humans formed an alliance with the Kragnar? And if that was the case, why were there so many Quintar losses? After all, the modest colonial defenses couldn't have inflicted all that damage. Vela's thoughts were filled with questions, and there were far too few answers. Helmsman, hail the colony. The man gave a nod of comprehension and begins pushing buttons on his control panel. No answer on the usual frequencies. Emergency channels down. I realize it's not my place to suggest this, but perhaps their communication systems were disabled? Vela sighs. A sensible deduction. Dispatch an investigative team to the planet's surface. Bring someone to me who can provide explanations. One of the colony queens had been summoned before Vela, and although the queen was older and considerably more experienced than her, Vela nonetheless maintained the higher authority due to her position as a core world princess. The queen inclined her head just a bit, her massive abdomen throbbing serenely. Vela responds to her in kind. My lady queen, what happened here? The older female draws a deep breath and straightens herself out. I have to confess the occurrences that took place here are peculiar, to put it mildly. I can only speak to what I personally observed, but I shall endeavor to relay the story to you as precisely as I'm able. It began 3 cycles back, when a Kragnar armada emerged from subspace, insisting we surrender our harvests and silk, or they would annihilate our colony. Since we were given no alternative, we were forced to obey. The Kragnar seized our provisions, along with all of our silk. We thought that would be the conclusion, and that they would depart and leave us alone. We had been mistaken. Upon clearing orbit, they swung back and unleashed their weapons on us, devastating our defensive fleet within minutes. Our courageous fighters battled stoically against overwhelming odds, yet they succumbed to the brutes' greater numbers and armaments. The Kragnar then began bombing our colony, demolishing our spaceport and our communications facility. However, we were able to send out a distress signal to the neighboring Senate colonies. Then the humans appeared. Initially, we assumed it was another Kragnar raiding party, but they began tearing the raiders apart from the rear. They were ruthlessly efficient, disabling all the raiding ships facing the colony, preventing them from turning to use their weapons. Then they utterly destroyed the Kragnar. Following the conflict, we thought the humans would betray us, enslaving us, or perhaps something even more dreadful. As they breached the atmosphere, I beseeched the 7 deities of the hive to safeguard my offspring. However, the humans then began offloading the provisions the Kragnar had seized from our people. Although they retained the silk and seized the valueless clearstones as what they termed a service tax prior to departing, they nonetheless rescued us. I still can't comprehend why they did it. The humans and their allies rescued our colony not just from annihilation by the Kragnar, but also from famine. That is what happened here, my lady princess. The more she learned about the humans, the less sense they made. They were criminals, dregs of the galaxy, buccaneers, traffickers, killers, and robbers. And then they went and rescued a settlement in trouble, assisting it when they had no personal interest in the situation. Leaving with half of the spoils and some useless sparkly rocks. What were the humans up to? What do they want? Vela simply cannot understand their motivation. If it were greed, why did they depart with so little, taking just a portion of the spoils? If it was sheer benevolence, why did they loot at all? If it were a longing for recognition, why not remain and accept a formal commendation? They are all mad. She was becoming very convinced of that by now. And it appeared increasingly as though they were pulling their allies deeper into madness along with them. Vela held back her questions about the mental state of the Alliance species for the time being. Have you got any notion about where the pirates headed after that? I'm looking to apprehend the one called Rowan Blackthorn. The subsequent stop on Vela's voyage was considerably less pleasant than her earlier ones. Surrounding the vessel was a vast stretch of asteroid fields and lifeless planets. The closest star was about to go supernova, and the whole solar system mirrored its condition of decline. This wasn't a place for civilized folks. It was a lawless region, distant from the grasp of any authority, alliance, or senate. It was the domain of pirates. Vela experienced an increasing sense of discomfort as she gazed into the encompassing darkness. Was it truly worth it? What was she doing here? At any moment they could be attacked by pirates or slavers. The knot in her throat was getting bigger, but her honor was at stake. A captive, her captive, had slipped from her hold. She needed to reclaim him, or face eternal disgrace. But damn if she didn't want to turn tail and run. This region of space was the domain of the Kragnar, the Vorgath, and the Cillian, the most fearsome of the galaxy's sentient beings. Well, beyond the humans. At least the humans didn't consume the flesh of sentient beings, Vela reflected inwardly, shivering. The Cillian and their Vorgath minions had been the subject of nightmares well before the humans were discovered. Why in the name of all the gods did he have to go here? She had sensed it was coming. She had perceived it in the tightness in her throat and in shivers coursing along her exoskeleton. They were under attack. She had observed the sleek, predatory vessels, far removed from the crude Kragnar craft, that more often resembled bolted-together space debris rather than ships. No, these vessels, unmistakably avian in design, were anything but crude. They were crafted to be maneuverable and swift, and they were. By the gods, they certainly were. The powerful plasma weaponry of her Justicar-class cruiser would tear the agile frigates apart if only they could score a direct hit. But it seemed impossible. The enemy ships were just too swift, too maneuverable. It was as though the opposing vessels could pirouette around their guns. And the cursed asteroids certainly didn't make their targeting any simpler. Whenever a fortunate shot that ought to have struck one of the Cillian frigates was fired, it would instead collide with the asteroids scattered throughout the local space. Meanwhile, the shields were bombarded by a myriad of enemy shots. "Helmsman, how soon will the subspace drives be ready? We've got to get out of here." The helmsman was frantically working on his station. "Ma'am, the heat sinks are nearly at capacity. If we attempt to jump now, we'll be roasted by the heat produced well before we get anywhere close to safe space. Curse the heat sinks, curse the subspace drives, curse the plasma cannons, and curse the shields." This blasted jump was the worst choice of Vela's life. Why hadn't she simply let Rowan Blackthorn go? Why did she even attempt it? Though she might ask herself this, she knew why. It was her damn pride and the wish to not fail her mother, the queen. And now she was going to die for the sake of that pride. The helmsman screamed out, the terror soaking through his words. "Ma'am, the shields are failing." They had been boarded. The Cillian had no intention of destroying the ship. They weren't content with simply taking all their possessions. They were determined to capture the Zexar, whether alive or dead. Vela found herself encircled by her most elite soldiers and inquisitors. They were equipped and protected with the best weaponry and armor the Zexar possessed. They gleamed in the light of the vessel, every piece of their gear buffed to a reflective brilliance. The Inquisitors' plasma staves pulsed gently, and Vela heard the soft rustling of their white ceremonial robes. She was aware they would all sacrifice themselves for her, yet a sense of hopelessness and despair remained deeply rooted in her heart. Still, she couldn't let it show. She was the pillar on which the troops' morale rested. If she succumbed to despair, all would be lost. She would not doom her men to being captured alive by the Cillian, for even death was preferable to that. She listened to the clamor of the Vorgath warriors rushing through the corridors of the vessel. There was no sound more terrifying than that. It has begun. The hairy abominations had arrived at the Zexar defenders' line in a wave of talons and teeth, and just behind them were their winged overlords. Vela observed as her chief inquisitor fell. The fangs of a blood-covered Vorgath sunk deep into his throat. Yet she also experienced a hint of pride, noticing that he was dragging the beast along with him to his demise. The plasma stave's discharge had seared a hole in the creature's chest, yet the monster continued undeterred. She understood the reason. Every one of them was experiencing a rush from synthetic adrenaline, the combat stimulant that was given to them by the Cillian prior to each encounter. This was the way they had been so thoroughly dominated by the bird-like creatures. They were hooked on the substance. However, this wasn't the moment to dwell on such matters, as all around her the brave defenders and the horrific attackers were battling and perishing. But the Zexar were dwindling, and the Vorgath were without number. Vela was ready for the upcoming events. She clutched a small container of poison in her grasp. Once the enemy had prevailed, she refused to give them the satisfaction of capturing her alive. And even that death was better than being cooked alive and eaten. Anything was better than that. 3 waves they had endured so far. On 3 occasions, her honor guard had battled with mandible and claw and repelled the Vorgath. But there were so few of them left. During the 2nd wave, the leader of her forces had been struck down, and in the 3rd, the majority of the surviving soldiers had been cut down. At present, makeshift shelters constructed from the corpses of the fallen, both Vorgath and Zexar, shielded the few remaining fighters. Her gaze falls upon the motionless bodies of the head inquisitor and the guard commander. Even in death they still serve. She mused inwardly, grief coursing through her, and before long she would be among them. She merely hoped that the deity of the hereafter would save her from the destiny of her earthly body. It would be soon now, she was certain. They wouldn't make it through the next wave. She could hear them coming now. She readies the vial of poison. Soon. The last soldier fell, and Vela knew her time was here. She raises the vial of poison towards her mouth. She experiences a searing sensation as her hand is vaporized in a burst of plasma fire. No! The venom had dissipated, and the numb, icy dread she had experienced until now ignites into a blaze, surging through her entire being. No, this can't be. She can't end up like this. This can't be the end. Vela was pulled, struggling and yelling from her station on the cruiser's bridge, and shortly after she was thrown into a tiny confined cell with the remaining survivors of the cruiser. She ended up seated alongside the medical staff, the helmsman, and several of the servant personnel. Not one emerged unharmed, and she noticed that the helmsman's chitin had fractured near the wrists, rendering his hands practically useless. He sat there profoundly morose, but then she figured he had all right to be. Vela had long ago accepted the inevitability of what was to come, and she had fallen into a state of numb resignation. Even the remnant of her arm, which had been crudely cauterized to prevent her from bleeding out before they were done with her, was now merely a slight discomfort to her. The helmsman looks up and meets her gaze. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Vela shook her head slowly. No. No, we're not. They had landed on a space station, most foul. Upon her initial inhalation of the station's air, she detected the aroma of searing meat, and she understood its implication. Before long, they would be cooked and served to some Vorgath or Cillian. She could sense the warmth of various stoves as they were nudged along a narrow passageway of sorts, bordered by kitchens and enclosures. Pens filled with sentient creatures of all kinds. While being guided down the street, she observed the despairing looks of the beings who shared her destiny. This was the ultimate stop. It was here that their lives would come to an end. At last, they put her in a tiny enclosure, fastening a metal collar around her neck, which was connected to a chain to prevent her from escaping. Why bother, she thought. There's nowhere for us to go. It was indeed accurate. They found themselves on a Cillian station in an area rife with criminals and outlaws, without a vessel to call their own. At least they no longer possessed one. The Cillian had ensured that outcome. Then it dawned on her that the chain's function was not to prevent them from escaping, but to make certain they weren't taken away by a competitor of the establishment they were purchased by. She observed credits being exchanged from the store owner to their former captors. See, female Zexar, very exotic. Such good meat. You interested? 1,000 credits. Vela gazed vacantly at the floor of her enclosure. She had already witnessed the helmsman being pulled away, and the noises. Oh gods, the sounds. The roads were perpetually echoing with the cries of the perishing, and the Cillian appeared to delight in it. Why has these vile fiends not been exterminated already? You know something. What if you sell me your whole inventory, alive, and I'll refrain from blowing your damn brains out? The quiet earnestness of the unfamiliar voice pulled Vela from her gloomy reflections. What? Guard! Bang! She watched as the shopkeeper's head burst into green slime, and abruptly the street erupted with gunfire. The cage door was flung open so violently that it tore off its hinges, followed by the unlocking of her chains. Two powerful, muscular arms pick her up, ever so gently. Hey there, sweet cheeks. Missed me? The humans had snuck their way onto the station, which had become a scene of conflict. The humans were decimating the unsuspecting Cillian and their Vorgath underlings with a brutality Vela had never witnessed before. It wasn't a battle. It was a rout. Vela had heard about the humans' prowess in close combat before, but she had never witnessed it. The Vorgath, who had been the uncontested champions of melee warfare, were torn apart, ripped limb from limb by the humans they were engaging. The humans possessed no claws or thick hides, yet they boasted a muscle mass denser than anything encountered elsewhere, and they wielded knives. Despite not truly requiring them, these metal artificial claws proved far more effective than the Vorgath's natural armaments could ever hope to be. Additionally, the humans donned power armor. Vela had never encountered power armor so slim, and the realization that the human pirates possessed such sophisticated combat suits was alarming. But as it was now, she was overjoyed that they did. Although she had become the captive of the very individual she had pursued for so long, she had been pulled from the brink of death. Although she's likely to end up as a captive of the humans, she was still breathing. The relief, the joy that flooded through her was immeasurable. Vela found herself in the identical medical bay she had been to only a few cycles earlier. She couldn't comprehend the reason, but the human hadn't kept her captive. He hadn't imposed himself on her. He hadn't done a single thing to her. Well, that wasn't entirely the truth. He had ordered her healed. The human medical officer aboard the Crimson Falcon had made her best effort to tend to Vela's wounds, as well as those of her fellow Zexar survivors. Vela had passed the majority of the journey in a semi-intoxicated state from painkillers, and subsequently found herself moved to the medical facility of the human space station. She tried flexing her new hand. It was somewhat unsettling, the sophisticated piece of technology the humans had given her without charge. They called it a prosthesis, a robotic limb encased in a covering she had been permitted to create herself. In the end, she had chosen one of the humans' artistic designs. Her left arm had become an array of beautiful blue shades, speckled with yellow and white, resembling stars. She had heard that the design was influenced by a human artist who had passed away centuries earlier. The humans were astounding. They had grown famous for their merciless fighting skills. Yet their music and their art was something so incredible she struggled to describe it. And their generosity was probably the most astonishing of it all. A message had been sent to her people informing them of her condition, and she was returning home. The humans had granted her not just her life and her arm again, but also her liberty. She had believed them. Savages, but she couldn't have been more wrong. They were beautiful.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.